I'm Audrey Wilson, 34, standing in a designer dress at my father Richard's lavish $65,000 birthday celebration. For years, I've been the outsider in my perfect family portrait. Tonight, as champagne flowed and Chicago's elite mingled, my dad publicly humiliated me with words that finally confirmed what I'd always felt. Little did he know, the DNA test results in my purse would change everything. Sometimes family secrets stay buried until someone decides to dig them up. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I took back not just a $230,000 Maybach, but my entire identity. Looking back at my childhood photos, the differences were always visible. My three siblings, Michael, Stephanie, and Thomas, all blessed with Richard's golden blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Then there was me, the anomaly with auburn waves and hazel eyes. "You take after your grandmother," my mother Elaine would say whenever I questioned our differences. I accepted this explanation, even though no grandmother on either side had my coloring. The physical differences were just the beginning. Richard Wilson, Chicago's real estate mogul with developments across the Midwest, never seemed to look at me the same way he looked at my siblings. When Michael hit a home run in Little League, Richard would lift him onto his shoulders. When Stephanie won her dance competitions, he'd bring roses and spin her around. For Thomas's science fair victories, there were elaborate celebration dinners. My academic achievements, consistently higher than my siblings, were acknowledged with distracted nods and generic good jobs. I still remember winning the regional spelling bee in 4th grade. While other parents filmed their children, my mother sat alone in the audience. Richard had an unmissable meeting. That same evening, he managed to make it to Michael's regular season baseball game. "Your father's just busy with work, honey," my mother would explain, her eyes never quite meeting mine when she made these excuses. She overcompensated with her own affection, always making sure to celebrate my accomplishments with special mother-daughter outings. Now I understand she was trying to fill a void she knew existed. The Wilson family lived in a sprawling mansion in Lake Forest, one of Chicago's most prestigious suburbs. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, indoor and outdoor pools, and a 3-car garage housing Richard's collection of luxury vehicles. From the outside, we were the perfect American family: successful businessman father, elegant stay-at-home mother, and 4 bright, attractive children. Our Christmas cards were the envy of the neighborhood. Inside those pristine walls, the reality was different. When I was 8, the school called my parents because no one had picked me up 2 hours after dismissal. Richard was supposed to get me that day, but apparently forgot when a business opportunity arose. My mother was at Thomas's doctor appointment. The school secretary gave me a pitying look I never forgot. Christmas mornings in the Wilson household were elaborate affairs, with mountains of presents under a perfectly decorated 12-foot tree. Each year, I noticed the pattern. My siblings would unwrap the latest gaming systems, designer clothes, or expensive electronics. My gifts, while nice enough to prevent obvious complaints, were always noticeably less expensive and thoughtful. One year, when I was 12, all 3 siblings received new laptops. I got a gift card. Still, I tried. God, how I tried to earn Richard's approval. I pushed myself academically, graduating elementary school with perfect grades. In middle school, I joined every club and activity I could, hoping he'd show up to at least one event. I still have the program from my solo in the 7th grade choir concert, where I scanned the audience repeatedly during my performance, looking for his face in the crowd. My mother later told me he had an emergency client dinner. Does Dad love me? I finally asked my mother directly when I was 13. We were sitting in her garden, her sanctuary away from Richard's demanding presence. Her hands froze over the roses she was tending. "Of course he does, Audrey. He just has a difficult time showing affection." The slight tremor in her voice planted the first serious doubt in my mind. By 14, I developed a theory that I was adopted. It would explain the physical differences, the emotional distance. I searched our home office for adoption papers while my parents attended one of Richard's charity galas. Instead, I found my birth certificate listing Richard Wilson as my father. The mystery remained. Throughout these years, Richard's real estate business boomed. Wilson Properties developed luxury condominiums, office towers, and shopping centers across Chicago and neighboring states. His success featured regularly in business magazines, often with family photos accompanying articles about his work-life balance and family values. The irony wasn't lost on me, even as a teenager. Family is everything, he'd say in interviews, his arm around my mother, my siblings prominently featured. I was always positioned slightly apart, as if the photographer sensed the invisible barrier. My mother tried to compensate for Richard's coldness with her own warmth. She attended every event, saved every certificate and award, and created elaborate scrapbooks of my achievements. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with a strange mixture of pride and sadness that I couldn't decipher until much later. Despite the emotional neglect, our family maintained appearances. Sunday dinners were mandatory, summer vacations to Martha's Vineyard carefully documented on social media, and family portraits updated annually. In each photo, Richard's hand would rest on Michael's shoulder, while his other arm wrapped around Stephanie. Thomas would stand proudly next to them. I was always positioned slightly apart, usually beside my mother. I learned to live with it, to accept the subtle rejections as normal. I convinced myself that perhaps Richard was just harder on me because he saw more potential. Maybe his distance was a form of respect for my independence. Children are remarkably skilled at creating narratives that protect them from painful truths. By the time I entered high school, I had perfected the art of seeking validation elsewhere. Teachers became my surrogate parents, their praise filling some of the emptiness left by Richard's indifference. Yet nothing quite healed the wound of watching my father beam with pride at my siblings while barely acknowledging my existence. High school should have been a fresh start, but the patterns established in childhood only intensified. I threw myself into academics with fervor, graduating as valedictorian of my class. While my siblings maintained respectable B averages that satisfied Richard, my perfect 4.0 GPA and SAT scores in the 99th percentile barely registered on his radar. "Not everyone needs to be an academic overachiever, Audrey," he commented during a dinner where my report card was briefly discussed before quickly moving on to Michael's football scholarship prospects. The dismissal of my achievements stung more than outright criticism would have. My 16th birthday marked a particularly painful milestone. In the Wilson family, turning 16 was celebrated with considerable fanfare. Michael received a brand new BMW, Stephanie got a sweet 16 party that cost nearly $20,000, and Thomas would later receive a similar car and a weekend trip to New York. For my 16th, my mother planned a modest dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago. Richard arrived 45 minutes late, checked his watch repeatedly throughout the meal, and left before dessert arrived, claiming a business emergency required his immediate attention. "I'm sorry, sweetie," my mother said, her eyes downcast as she watched him leave. "You know how important his work is." But later that night, I overheard my parents arguing in their bedroom. "She's your daughter too, Richard." My mother's voice, usually so controlled, trembled with anger. "I showed up, didn't I?" he responded coldly. "For all of 20 minutes. You couldn't even stay for cake. Do you know what message that sends? What do you want from me, Elaine?" His voice dropped lower, but I could still hear him through the door. "I've provided everything she could need. The best schools, clothes, vacations. What more am I supposed to do?" "Be a father," my mother replied simply. "Love her the way you love the others." The silence that followed was deafening. I tiptoed back to my room before I could hear his response, but his lack of immediate denial confirmed what I'd always suspected. Whatever prevented Richard from connecting with me went beyond mere personality differences. The contrast between my celebration and my brother Michael's 16th birthday party 2 years earlier couldn't have been more stark. Richard had rented out the entire top floor of the Willis Tower, invited half of Chicago's business elite, and given an emotional speech about how proud he was of his firstborn son, who embodies everything a Wilson should be. As college application season approached, I focused on prestigious universities, hoping that perhaps academic achievement at the highest level would finally earn Richard's respect. When acceptance letters arrived from Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, my mother organized a small celebration dinner. Northwestern is a better business school anyway, Richard commented when I announced my acceptance to Harvard. And it's local. Michael made the right choice staying in Chicago. The fact that I was interested in literature and marketing, not business, seemed irrelevant to him. Later that week, I overheard another conversation that would haunt me for years. Harvard is asking for $30,000 after scholarships, my mother said to Richard in his home office. That's ridiculous, he replied. Northwestern offered Michael a full ride for athletics, and Thomas will likely get the same. Audrey earned academic scholarships, but it doesn't cover everything. Harvard is still Harvard, Richard. Why should I pay for her to study something useless like English literature 3,000 miles away? You know why you have to do this, my mother replied, her voice uncharacteristically firm. We've discussed this before. The conversation shifted as they noticed me in the hallway, but those words, you know why you have to do this, echoed in my mind. What obligation was my mother referring to? What unspoken agreement existed between my parents regarding me? Despite Richard's reluctance, I did attend Harvard, majoring in English with a minor in marketing. The distance from Chicago provided welcome relief from the constant reminder of my outsider status in the family. During those 4 years, I returned home only for major holidays, where the patterns continued. Thanksgiving my sophomore year stands out particularly. Richard had just closed a major development deal, and the dinner conversation revolved entirely around his success and my brother's athletic achievements. When I mentioned my internship offer from a prestigious publishing house, Richard cut me off. The publishing industry is dying, Audrey. You should focus on something practical. Michael's already been offered a position at Wilson Properties after graduation. I wasn't planning to join the family business, I replied, surprising myself with my directness. Richard's expression hardened. Of course not. That's for Wilson family members who understand loyalty and tradition. The table fell silent. Even my siblings looked uncomfortable with the explicit exclusion. My mother quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. Richard had essentially stated that despite bearing his name, I wasn't really part of the family in the way that mattered to him. That night, my sister Stephanie knocked on my bedroom door. Dad was being a jerk at dinner, she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. You know how he gets when business is stressful. It's not just stress, Steph, I replied. He's always been this way with me. She looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? Dad's tough on all of us. Not like with me. Haven't you noticed? Stephanie's uncomfortable expression revealed that perhaps she had noticed, but had chosen not to acknowledge it. He just communicates differently with different people, she offered weakly. That conversation showed me something important. The family dynamic I experienced was so normalized that even my siblings couldn't fully recognize its toxicity. To them, Richard was a demanding but loving father who pushed his children toward success. Only I experienced the cold indifference behind his occasional acknowledgments. By the time I graduated from Harvard, summa cum laude, I had already decided to make my own way in the world. Richard and my mother attended the ceremony, but he spent most of it checking emails on his phone. As graduates threw their caps in the air, I made a private vow to build a life so successful that I would never need Richard Wilson's approval again. Armed with my Harvard degree and a determination to succeed on my own terms, I entered the job market during a challenging economic period. Rather than leveraging the Wilson name, which would have opened doors throughout Chicago's business community, I used my mother's maiden name on applications. "Why are you doing this?" my mother asked when she discovered my altered resume. "Your father's connections could help you." "I need to know I can make it on my own," I told her. What I didn't say was that I'd rather struggle independently than succeed because of a man who couldn't bring himself to love me. My first job came at a mid-sized marketing firm in Boston. The starting salary barely covered my modest apartment and student loan payments, but it offered something priceless: experience in an industry I loved, completely separate from Richard's influence. I worked 80-hour weeks, volunteered for every challenging project, and studied industry trends during my limited free time. Within 2 years, I was promoted to account manager. By year 3, I was heading my own team. The vice president position came before my 30th birthday, accompanied by a salary that finally allowed me to live comfortably and start building my own investments. During those early career years, my contact with the Wilson family dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and occasional visits when business trips took me near Chicago. Richard's real estate empire continued to expand, and my siblings all took their predetermined places within it. Michael became the heir apparent as executive vice president, Stephanie headed their interior design division, and Thomas managed their technology integration department. My mother remained my one consistent connection to the family. We spoke weekly, and she visited me in Boston twice a year, always without Richard. During these visits, she seemed more relaxed, more authentic somehow, away from the carefully maintained facade of Wilson family perfection. "Your father asks about you," she claimed during one such visit, though the details she shared about these supposed inquiries were always vague and unconvincing. "He has my number," I replied simply. He never called. At 31, I made the leap from employee to entrepreneur, founding Horizon Marketing Partners, specializing in digital strategy for luxury brands. The risk paid off beyond my expectations. Within 18 months, we expanded from 3 employees to 23, with offices in Boston and New York. My client list included names that impressed even Richard's social circle, though I never leveraged these connections for family approval. Financial success brought personal freedom. I purchased a luxury condo in downtown Boston with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. My investment portfolio grew steadily. For the first time, I experienced what it meant to be valued for my actual contributions rather than measured against impossible familial expectations. It was during this period of professional ascendancy that I met James. Unlike previous relationships that had faltered partly due to my workaholic tendencies and partly due to my guarded nature, this connection felt different from the start. James, a corporate attorney with a psychology background, saw through my carefully constructed independence to the unhealed wounds beneath. 3 months into our relationship, after listening to stories about my family, he gently suggested therapy. "You've achieved remarkable success by conventional standards," he observed. "But I see how the mention of your family, especially your father, changes you. Have you considered talking to someone about it?" Initially resistant, I eventually agreed. Dr. Landon, a family therapist specializing in adult children of emotionally absent parents, helped me recognize patterns I'd normalized throughout my life. The hyperachievement, the difficulty accepting praise, the fear of vulnerability, all traced back to the fundamental question I'd never been able to answer: why couldn't my father love me? Sometimes there isn't a rational explanation for a parent's inability to connect with a child, Dr. Landon explained during one session. But sometimes there are concrete reasons that have nothing to do with the child's worthiness of love. Like what? I asked. Family secrets, circumstances of birth, projections of their own inadequacies. She paused thoughtfully. Have you ever considered the possibility that there might be a reason beyond personality differences for your father's distance? The question hung in the air. James had suggested something similar months earlier, the possibility that Richard might not be my biological father. I dismissed it then, but now, in the context of therapy, the idea resurfaced with new significance. My birth certificate lists him as my father, I said weakly. Birth certificates record legal parentage, not necessarily biological reality, Dr. Landon replied gently. The seed was planted, though I initially resisted its implications. What would it mean if the man who had rejected me my entire life wasn't actually my father? Would it explain his coldness or merely complicate an already painful family dynamic? James supported me through these difficult therapy sessions, never pushing but always offering perspective when asked. Unlike previous partners who'd been intimidated by my success or put off by my emotional guardedness, he seemed to understand that my achievements and defenses were two sides of the same coin. You don't have to solve the mystery of your family to be worthy of love, he told me one evening as we watched the sunset from my condo. But if knowing would bring you peace, I'm with you every step of the way. For months, I contemplated the possibility without taking action. My company expanded to Chicago, a business decision I'd resisted for years to avoid Richard's territory. The new office brought me back to my hometown more frequently, though I maintained my primary residence in Boston. During these Chicago visits, I occasionally saw my siblings. Our relationships had evolved into a cordial distance, Christmas cards, birthday texts, and rare dinners when schedules aligned. They seemed genuinely proud of my success, if somewhat confused by my complete separation from the family business. Dad mentions your company sometimes, Michael told me during one such dinner. He saw your feature in Forbes. Did he? I replied, hating that after everything, his potential approval still affected me. You should come by the house next time you're in town, he suggested. Things change. People change. I doubted Richard had changed, but I found myself wondering if perhaps I had changed enough to face him on equal footing. My company now rivaled certain divisions of Wilson Properties in annual revenue. I'd built my success without his name or connections. Maybe it was time to resolve the past and move forward. Life, however, had other plans. Before I could decide whether to reconnect with Richard, my mother called with news that would change everything. It's cancer, my mother said, her voice steady despite delivering such devastating news. Stage 3 breast cancer. The doctors are optimistic, but the treatment will be aggressive. I flew to Chicago that same day. Despite our differences, the Wilsons unified around my mother's diagnosis. Richard arranged for the best oncologists, Michael handled insurance and paperwork, Stephanie organized a care schedule, and Thomas researched clinical trials. I took a leave from my company to stay in Chicago during her initial treatment. Seeing Richard again after years of limited contact was jarring. He had aged, gray now dominating his once blonde hair, lines etched deeply around his eyes. He acknowledged me with a nod when I arrived at the hospital but maintained his distance, focusing entirely on my mother's care. On the third day of her hospital stay, an incident occurred that would ultimately unravel decades of secrecy. A nurse came to draw blood for additional tests, checking my mother's wristband and chart. We'll need to type her blood again, she mentioned. There seems to be a discrepancy in the records. She's O negative, I said automatically, remembering this fact from childhood discussions about our family's blood types. Richard and my siblings were all O positive, while my mother and I shared the rarer O negative type. The nurse looked up, surprised. Are you related? You have the same blood type. I'm her daughter, I replied. Oh! The nurse looked genuinely confused. I assumed you were a friend. The patient's husband mentioned that all their children have his blood type. After she left, I sat with this information, pieces clicking into place. Basic biology classes had taught me enough to know that if Richard were a positive and my mother O negative, their children could be either a positive or O negative. The fact that my siblings were all O positive while I was O negative wasn't impossible, but combined with everything else, it added another piece to the puzzle. During the weeks of my mother's initial treatment, I purchased an ancestry DNA test. I told myself it was mere curiosity, a distraction during hospital waiting room hours. The reality was that I needed to know the truth, whatever it might be. When the results arrived 6 weeks later, I opened them alone in my hotel room. The ethnicity breakdown showed nothing surprising, predominantly Western European ancestry, matching what I knew of both Wilson and my mother's family. The truly revealing information came in the DNA matches section. There, listed clearly, were my mother and all 3 siblings, with the expected percentages for a mother and half-siblings. Richard Wilson was notably absent from my genetic relatives. I sat with this information for days, unsure how to proceed. My mother's condition had stabilized after her 2nd round of chemotherapy. Her prognosis was improving, but she remained physically vulnerable. Was this the right time to confront decades of deception? Eventually, I chose a quiet afternoon when she was feeling relatively strong and we were alone in her hospital room. "Mom," I began carefully, "I need to ask you something important, and I need the truth." Perhaps she read something in my expression, or perhaps she'd been expecting this conversation for years, but understanding dawned in her eyes before I even showed her the DNA test results. "Is Richard my biological father?" I asked directly. Tears filled her eyes. "Oh, Audrey," she whispered, reaching for my hand. I always knew this day might come. The story emerged slowly, painfully. Shortly before her engagement to Richard, my mother had reconnected with an old boyfriend, David Calloway. One night of nostalgia and champagne led to an unplanned pregnancy. By the time she discovered she was expecting, she and Richard had already announced their engagement. "Richard agreed to raise you as his own," she explained, tears streaming down her face. "But he made me promise never to tell anyone, including you. He was building his business, cultivating an image. A pregnant fiancé was problematic enough without adding infidelity to the story." "Did he ever plan to tell me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He thought it was kinder not to," she said weakly. "He tried, Audrey. In the beginning, he really tried to love you the same way. But he couldn't. Or wouldn't." The distinction hardly mattered after decades of emotional neglect. "Who is David Calloway?" I asked. "Is he still alive? Does he know about me?" My mother shook her head. "He moved to California before you were born. I never told him. Richard insisted we make a clean break." She hesitated. "I looked him up online a few years ago. He passed away in 2015. Heart attack." The revelation that my biological father had died without ever knowing I existed hit me unexpectedly hard. A connection I never knew I had was permanently severed before I could even acknowledge it. "Please," my mother begged, gripping my hand weakly. "Don't tell anyone yet. Not while I'm fighting this." I couldn't bear the family falling apart right now. Despite my anger at decades of deception, I couldn't deny her request. She needed family unity to face cancer. The truth had waited 34 years. It could wait a few more months. Throughout her treatment, I maintained the facade. I attended family dinners where Richard continued to treat me with polite indifference. I coordinated with my siblings about her care without revealing what I now knew, that genetically, they were only my half-siblings. I watched Richard play the devoted husband while knowing he had maintained a lifelong lie that had caused me immeasurable pain. 6 months later, my mother entered remission. The family celebrated with a dinner at her favorite restaurant. As champagne flowed and toasts were made to her recovery, Richard announced his plans for an elaborate 65th birthday celebration. "Now that Elaine is better, it's time to celebrate life properly," he declared. "I'm renting the grand ballroom at the Peninsula. Everyone who's anyone in Chicago will be there." As plans for this extravagant event unfolded, my mother pulled me aside during one of our private moments. "I'm going to tell him that you know," she said quietly. "Now that I'm better, it's time for honesty." I nodded, appreciating her intention, but doubting it would change anything fundamental between Richard and me. 3 decades of emotional distance couldn't be erased with a simple acknowledgement of biological reality. 2 weeks before Richard's birthday extravaganza, my mother called. "I told him," she said simply. He knows that you know. What did he say? I asked. There was a pause. He said it doesn't change anything. That legally, you're still a Wilson. Another pause. He asked that you not mention it at his birthday celebration. For the family's sake. Of course. Even now, appearance mattered more than truth. Richard's reputation, the family image, remained paramount. Will you come to the party? My mother asked tentatively. It would mean a lot to me. Despite everything, I couldn't refuse her this request. After watching her fight for her life, I understood the fragility of time, the importance of being present even in difficult circumstances. I'll be there, I promised, though a plan was already forming in my mind. Richard wanted to maintain appearances? Fine, but this would be the last time I participated in the family charade. The invitation arrived via courier, heavy cream cardstock in an embossed envelope, announcing a celebration of Richard Wilson's 65 years at the Peninsula Chicago's Grand Ballroom. Black tie required, RSVP essential, no gifts necessary. The last line made me laugh bitterly. Richard Wilson, worth hundreds of millions, suggesting no gifts while simultaneously expecting extravagant tokens of appreciation from everyone in his circle. Are you sure you want to go? James asked as we discussed the upcoming event over dinner in my Boston apartment. He had been my rock throughout my mother's illness and the subsequent DNA revelation. I need closure, I explained. 34 years of feeling like an outsider, wondering what was wrong with me. Now I know it wasn't me at all. It was him, his choice, his lie, his inability to love a child who wasn't biologically his. James nodded thoughtfully. What exactly are you planning? I hesitated. The idea had been forming since my conversation with my mother. I'm going to acknowledge the truth publicly. Not dramatically, not vindicatively, but honestly. No more secrets, no more pretending. He'll be furious, James warned. I'm counting on it, I admitted. But what can he do? Disown me? I've never been a true daughter to him anyway. James took my hand across the table. I'll be right beside you, whatever you decide. Having him in my corner made all the difference. Together, we strategized my approach to the party. It would be dignified but unmistakable. The truth, finally spoken aloud in the very social circle Richard had been protecting with his lies. With 2 weeks until the event, I threw myself into preparations. The outfit was crucial. I wanted to look successful, confident, completely self-sufficient. After visiting several high-end boutiques, I selected a striking emerald green evening gown from a designer whose marketing campaign my company had recently managed. The color highlighted my auburn hair, the very feature that had always set me apart from the blonde Wilson clan. Next came the matter of a gift. Despite the invitation suggestion, showing up empty-handed wasn't an option. What do you give the man who has everything but has given you nothing of what truly matters? The answer came during a conversation with Michael, who called to coordinate travel details for the party. Dad's been eyeing the new Maybach, he mentioned casually. He test drove one last week. Probably waiting for one of us to notice his hints. The new Mercedes Maybach S-Class, a vehicle priced around $230,000. Exactly the kind of status symbol Richard would appreciate. With my company's success, I could afford it, though it would be a significant expenditure. Maybe we should go in on it together, Michael suggested. Split it 4 ways between the kids. Actually, I replied, making a split-second decision. I think I'll handle this one myself. Michael sounded surprised. The whole thing? That's generous, considering. He didn't finish the thought, but I knew what he meant. Considering my strained relationship with Richard. Considering I owed Richard nothing. It's time for grand gestures, I said ambiguously. The following day, I visited the Mercedes dealership in Boston and ordered the exact model Richard had test-driven in Chicago, obsidian black with porcelain/black Napa leather interior, all the available luxury packages. I arranged for delivery to my Chicago hotel the day before the party. Would you like a traditional key presentation box? the sales manager asked. Yes, I replied, and I'll need a special card to go with it. That evening, I drafted and redrafted the card's message, finally settling on something simple but unmistakable. To Richard, from the daughter you chose not to love. Now I'm choosing to. The week before the party, I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Landon to discuss my plans. Are you seeking revenge or closure? She asked directly. Is there a difference? I countered. Enormous, she replied. Revenge keeps you trapped in the cycle of pain. Closure allows you to walk away towards something better. Her words resonated. This confrontation needed to be my liberation, not another link in the chain binding me to decades of rejection. I'm not trying to hurt him the way he hurt me, I clarified. I just want to acknowledge the truth everyone has danced around my entire life. Then I can finally move forward. Dr. Landon nodded. Just be prepared for the possibility that Richard may never acknowledge his role in your pain. Some people simply cannot face their own failings. The night before flying to Chicago, James and I sat on my balcony, watching the Boston skyline twinkle against the dark sky. Are you nervous? He asked, his arm around my shoulders. Strangely, no, I replied. I feel calm, like I'm finally taking control of a narrative that's been written for me my whole life. Whatever happens tomorrow, James said, turning to face me, remember that your worth isn't determined by Richard Wilson's capacity to love. You've built an extraordinary life on your own terms. The morning of the party arrived with perfect Chicago fall weather. James and I checked into the Peninsula Hotel, where I found the delivered Maybach key waiting in a beautifully wrapped box. The car itself was being held by the dealership until after the party, when I would make my final decision about its ultimate ownership. As I prepared for the evening, applying makeup and styling my hair, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back bore Richard's last name, but not his DNA. She had his financial acumen, but none of his coldness. For 34 years, I'd been trying to earn the love of a man incapable of giving it to me. Tonight, I would finally stop trying. The Peninsula Chicago's Grand Ballroom had been transformed into a showcase of wealth and influence for Richard Wilson's 65th birthday celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with arrangements of white roses and hydrangeas. A string quartet played softly in one corner while white-gloved servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The guest list included Chicago's business elite, political figures, and social luminaries, at least 300 people, representing a who's who of Midwest power brokers. James whistled softly as we entered. Quite the production, he murmured. Must have cost a fortune. $65,000, according to Stephanie, I replied. $1,000 for each year of his precious life. We made our way through the crowd, stopping occasionally to greet acquaintances. My success in marketing had created my own network of connections, many of whom overlapped with Richard's circle. I felt eyes tracking our progress. The prodigal daughter returned, the successful entrepreneur who had made her fortune independent of the Wilson empire. Richard and my mother stood near the center of the room, greeting guests. My mother spotted me first, her face lighting up. She looked beautiful, her recovery from cancer treatments nearly complete. She wore a simple blue gown that complemented her still thin frame, her blonde hair styled elegantly around her face. Audrey, she called, extending her arms for an embrace. You look stunning. I hugged her warmly, then turned to face Richard. Up close, he looked every one of his 65 years, despite the obvious efforts to maintain his appearance. His handshake was firm but brief, his smile not reaching his eyes. You made it, he said flatly. I wouldn't miss it, I replied with equal coolness. This must be James, my mother interjected, clearly attempting to diffuse the tension. We've heard so much about you. As James chatted with my mother, Richard leaned closer to me. Your mother says you've been quite successful in Boston. Horizon Marketing cleared $50 million in revenue last year, I replied, unable to keep a hint of pride from my voice. Impressive, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Though real estate offers more stable long-term growth than marketing services. Even now, he couldn't offer a simple compliment without diminishing it. Something's never changed. We should catch up with Michael and the others, I said, unwilling to prolong this particular conversation. Enjoy your party, Richard. My siblings were gathered near the bar, already several drinks into the evening. Their greetings were warmer than Richard's, if somewhat reserved. Years of separate lives had created a distance that went beyond geography. The prodigy returns, Michael said, raising his glass in a mock toast. At 37, he had grown into Richard's spitting image, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same confident bearing. Boston treating you well? Can't complain, I replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. How's life as the heir apparent? Michael grinned. Dad's nowhere near ready to step down, but I'm learning the ropes. You should see the Riverside development we're breaking ground on next month. Stephanie interjected, we've all seen the features about Horizon Marketing. That Lux Brands campaign was incredible. Thanks, I said, genuinely appreciating her acknowledgement. Your interior design work for the Wilson Properties developments has been getting attention too. I saw the spread in Architectural Digest. Thomas, the youngest at 30, seemed the most genuine in his welcome. We should collaborate sometime, he suggested. Wilson Properties could use innovative marketing approaches for our tech-integrated buildings. We fell into shop talk, momentarily bridging the gap that years and circumstances had created. For a brief moment, it felt almost normal. Four successful professionals discussing business strategies, our complicated family dynamic temporarily set aside. The illusion of normalcy shattered when dinner was announced. The seating arrangement placed me at the family table but furthest from Richard, a physical manifestation of my peripheral status. James squeezed my hand under the table, a silent reminder of his support. The meal progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Premium wines flowed freely as conversations buzzed around the room. From my position, I could observe Richard holding court, perfectly at ease as the center of attention. This was his element, surrounded by admirers, his carefully cultivated image of successful businessman and family man on full display. After the dessert course, the moment I had been both dreading and anticipating arrived. Richard stood, gently tapping his crystal glass for attention. The room gradually fell silent as all eyes turned toward him. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began, his voice strong and confident. Reaching 65 years is a milestone that invites reflection. I've been extraordinarily fortunate in both business and family. He proceeded to recount highlights from his career, the founding of Wilson Properties, key developments that had transformed Chicago's skyline, awards and recognitions accumulated over 4 decades in real estate. The crowd listened attentively, occasionally applauding his achievements. Then he shifted to family. But no success in business compares to the joy of family. My wife Elaine, he gestured toward my mother, who smiled dutifully, has been my partner in everything for 38 wonderful years. Her recent health challenges reminded us all how precious our time together truly is. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room as guests nodded in agreement. And my children, Richard continued, his gaze moving to my siblings, have been my greatest legacy. Michael, who has shown such promise in continuing the Wilson Properties tradition. Stephanie, whose design vision has elevated our developments to art. Thomas, whose technological innovations are preparing our company for the future. His gaze then shifted to me, and I felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. There was a brief, pregnant pause. And Audrey, he said, his tone noticeably cooler, who chose her own path away from the family business. Another pause, then the words that would change everything. I'm proud of all my children, except her. Never quite fit in, did you, Audrey? The room went completely silent. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. My mother's face drained of color. My siblings looked shocked, clearly not expecting such a public repudiation. In that moment, something crystallized within me. 34 years of seeking approval, of wondering what was wrong with me, of trying to earn love that should have been freely given, all of it condensed into perfect clarity. This man had never been my father in any way that mattered, and he had just freed me from any remaining obligation to pretend otherwise. I rose slowly from my seat, straightening to my full height. The emerald dress caught the light as I moved, drawing all eyes in the room. James started to stand with me, but I gently touched his shoulder, signaling that this was something I needed to do alone. "You're right, Richard," I said, my voice steady and clear in the silent room. "I never did fit in. For years, I thought that was my failure, some fundamental flaw that made me unworthy of your love." I reached into my evening bag and withdrew the DNA test results I'd brought for exactly this moment. The papers made a soft sound as I unfolded them. "But now I understand it wasn't my failure at all. It was yours." I walked slowly around the table, approaching Richard directly. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate, measured. "You couldn't love me because every time you looked at me, I reminded you of a truth you couldn't face." I placed the DNA results on the table before him. "I wasn't your biological daughter. But I was still a child who deserved love, not 3 decades of calculated indifference." Gasps and whispers erupted around the room. Richard's face flushed deep red, his knuckles white around his champagne glass. "This is hardly the time or place," he began, his voice low and threatening. "You chose the time and place when you publicly humiliated me in front of 300 guests," I interrupted. "For 34 years, I've lived with your rejection. I've achieved success you never acknowledged, built a life you never valued, and finally discovered a truth you never had the courage to tell me." I turned to address the stunned crowd, many of whom were now watching with undisguised fascination. The perfect Wilson family image has always been just that, an image. A carefully constructed facade hiding the reality that Richard Wilson could not love a child who didn't share his DNA, despite raising her as his own. Returning my attention to Richard, I reached for the gift box containing the Maybach key. "I brought you a gift. A new Mercedes Maybach S-Class, exactly the model you test drove last week." I opened the box, revealing the key and the card. But gifts, like parenthood, can be reconsidered. I closed the box and picked it up. "This key, like your love, will remain out of reach. Some things once revealed can't be wrapped up again in pretty packages." Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Enough," he hissed. "You've made your point." "Actually, I've only just started finding my voice," I replied calmly. "But you're right about one thing. I don't belong here. I never did. Not because of my DNA, but because I refuse to accept conditional love as good enough." I turned to my mother, whose eyes were filled with tears. "Mom, I love you. This isn't about you. Take care of yourself." To my siblings, I added, "Blood makes us related. DNA doesn't change that we grew up together. When you're ready to have a relationship that isn't defined by Richard's terms, you know how to reach me." Finally, I looked at James, who watched me with pride shining in his eyes. He stood and moved to my side, taking my hand. "Thank you all for the clarity this evening has provided." I addressed the room one final time. "The truth really does set you free." With that, I turned and walked toward the exit, James beside me, the Maybach key still in my hand. Behind us, chaos erupted. My mother's sobs, Richard's attempts to regain control of the room, guests murmuring in shocked disbelief. As we pushed through the ballroom doors into the hotel lobby, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For the first time in my life, I wasn't seeking Richard Wilson's approval or mourning its absence. I was simply Audrey, defined by my own accomplishments, choices, and capacity for love, not by a man who had never truly been my father. The aftermath of Richard's birthday party unfolded with the speed and intensity of a Chicago thunderstorm. By the time James and I reached our hotel room, my phone was already flooding with notifications, texts from siblings, tearful voicemails from my mother, and even messages from attendees expressing shock, sympathy, or morbid curiosity. Should I turn it off? I asked James, staring at the device as it vibrated continuously in my hand. That's entirely up to you, he replied. This is your story now. You get to decide how and when to engage. I silenced the phone but didn't power it off completely. Despite everything, I couldn't entirely sever the connection to my family, particularly my mother, who I knew was caught in an impossible position between her husband and her daughter. The first call I answered came shortly after midnight. My mother, her voice raw from crying. I told him everything, she said without preamble. After you left, we had the most honest conversation of our marriage. 35 years of silence, finally broken. How did he take it? I asked, though I could guess the answer. He's angry, hurt, embarrassed. But mostly, I think he's facing his own failures for the first time. She paused. He never meant for it to be this way, Audrey. When we agreed to raise you as his, he truly believed he could love you as his own. Intentions don't erase 34 years of emotional neglect, Mom. I know, she whispered. I failed you too. I should have insisted on the truth years ago. We talked for nearly an hour, the most honest conversation we'd ever had. She explained how young and frightened she'd been, pregnant and uncertain, accepting Richard's conditions because they seemed like the only way forward. How she'd watched him struggle to connect with me and had tried to compensate with her own love. How cancer had finally given her the courage to face uncomfortable truths. What happens now? I asked as our conversation wound down. I don't know, she admitted. But whatever comes next will be built on truth, not pretense. That has to be better in the long run. The next day brought a flurry of messages from my siblings. Michael's text was predictably defensive. You could have handled this privately. Do you have any idea what this does to the family reputation? Stephanie struck a more conciliatory tone. I wish I had known. It explains so much about how Dad treated you. Can we talk when the dust settles? Thomas, always the most emotionally intelligent of my siblings, simply wrote, I'm still your brother. DNA be damned. Love you, AUD. Their reactions reflected their personalities and positions within the family structure. Michael, as heir apparent, was most invested in maintaining the Wilson facade. Stephanie, caught between loyalty to our parents and genuine affection for me, sought middle ground. Thomas, the youngest and least entrenched in family politics, could most easily extend unconditional acceptance. 3 days after the party, as James and I prepared to return to Boston, an unexpected name appeared on my phone, Richard Wilson. Should I answer? I asked James, my hand hovering over the screen. That depends, he replied thoughtfully. Are you ready to hear whatever he has to say? I took a deep breath and accepted the call. Hello, Richard. Audrey. His voice sounded different, older, more subdued. We need to talk. I'm listening. Not over the phone. In person. My office, today at 2. Part of me wanted to refuse, to deny him the control he was so accustomed to exercising. But another part recognized that this conversation was necessary for my own closure. Fine, I agreed. But I'm bringing James. Bring whoever you want, he replied, then added, please, as if the word were foreign to his tongue. Wilson Properties occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower bearing the family name. I'd visited rarely as an adult, always feeling like an intruder in spaces my siblings navigated with birthright confidence. Richard's corner office showcased floor-to-ceiling views of Chicago's skyline and Lake Michigan beyond. He stood as we entered, gesturing toward the seating area rather than positioning himself behind his imposing desk. A subtle but significant departure from his usual power dynamics. Thank you for coming, he began, another uncharacteristic acknowledgement. For several minutes, he spoke about the company, market conditions, recent developments, safe topics that delayed the inevitable confrontation. Finally, he exhaled heavily and met my gaze directly. "Your mother has explained everything," he said. "Things I've known but never processed appropriately." "That's quite an understatement," I replied, keeping my voice level. "I'd like to offer you $5 million, he stated abruptly. A clean break. Confidentiality agreement included, naturally. James tensed beside me, but I remained calm. In some ways, this transactional approach was exactly what I expected from Richard Wilson. "You still don't understand," I said, shaking my head. "This was never about money. I built my own success. I don't need or want your millions." "Then what do you want?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Nothing from you, not anymore. For years, all I wanted was your love and approval. Now I just want the truth acknowledged, not buried under more secrets and legal documents." Richard looked genuinely lost, a man whose entire worldview operated on financial transactions and power dynamics, confronted with an emotional reality he couldn't quantify or control. "The truth is," he said finally, "I tried to love you as my own. But every time I looked at you, I saw another man. My pride, it got in the way." By the time I realized what I'd done, the pattern was set. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was perhaps the most honest thing Richard Wilson had ever said to me. "Thank you for that much honesty, at least," I replied, standing to indicate the conversation was concluding. "I won't take your money, and I won't sign anything. But I also won't deliberately damage your reputation or the family business. The truth is enough for me." As James and I walked toward the door, Richard called after me. "What will you do now?" I turned back briefly. "Live my life on my terms. And find my real family." The search for David Calloway's family began as soon as I returned to Boston. With his name and approximate location, plus the resources my success afforded me, it took less than 2 weeks to locate his surviving family in San Diego: a sister, Barbara, and 2 children from his marriage, a son, Ryan, and a daughter, Melissa. The first phone call to Barbara Calloway was among the most nerve-wracking moments of my life. "He never knew," she confirmed after hearing my story. But there was always something missing in David's life. He used to say he felt like he'd left something important behind in Chicago. Through Barbara, I arranged to meet my half-siblings in person. Unlike the Wilson siblings, who shared my upbringing but not my DNA, Ryan and Melissa Calloway shared my biology, but none of my history. Our first meeting at a San Diego beachfront restaurant was awkward, emotional, and ultimately healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. "You have his eyes," Melissa observed, studying my face across the table. At 36, she was just 2 years older than me. We could have grown up as sisters in a different reality. "And his terrible sense of humor," Ryan added with a grin after hearing some of my dry observations. "Dad would have loved knowing about you." They shared stories about David, his career as an architect, his passion for sailing, his devotion to his children. They showed me photographs, pointed out resemblances, and invited me into their lives with an openness that contrasted sharply with my Wilson experience. "He wasn't perfect," Ryan acknowledged. "But he loved deeply. That much I know for certain." Over the following months, I gradually built relationships with my Calloway relatives while renegotiating boundaries with the Wilsons. My mother and I grew closer through weekly phone calls and regular visits, our relationship strengthened by honesty rather than weakened by it. Thomas was the first Wilson sibling to visit me in Boston, arriving unannounced at my office one afternoon. "I told Dad I needed space to figure things out," he explained over dinner that evening. "The truth is, I've always admired how you built your own path. Maybe I needed to do the same." Stephanie followed a month later, tentatively rebuilding our connection without Richard's influence coloring our interactions. Only Michael maintained distance, still positioned as Richard's successor and unwilling to risk that status by forming independent relationships. Therapy continued to be essential as I processed these complex family dynamics. Dr. Landon helped me navigate the emotional landscape of having, in essence, Two separate family systems, neither quite complete, both requiring different types of healing. Family isn't always about DNA or legal definitions, she observed during one particularly insightful session. Sometimes it's about who shows up for you, who sees you clearly, who makes space for your authentic self. By this measure, James increasingly became the most important family in my life. 6 months after Richard's birthday party, during a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard, reclaiming a location previously associated with painful Wilson family vacations, he proposed. "I love you," he said simply, holding out a ring that caught the sunset light. Not because of or despite your family story, but because of who you've become through it all. Our engagement accelerated my healing process, offering a vision of family built on choice rather than obligation. We decided on a small wedding, inviting only those who had demonstrated genuine care for our relationship, a guest list that included my mother, Thomas, Stephanie, the Callaways, and friends who had become chosen family over the years. Richard was not invited, a decision that felt less like punishment and more like honest acknowledgement of our reality. He sent an expensive gift anyway, Old Habits Die Hard, which I donated to a foster care organization supporting children without stable family connections. 1 year after the confrontation at Richard's birthday party, my marketing agency launched a pro bono campaign for an adoption advocacy group, helping adult adoptees and children in complex family situations find support and resources. The project brought my professional skills and personal experience together in meaningful ways, creating something positive from decades of confusion. Life continues to evolve. My relationship with the Wilsons remains complicated. My mother caught between loyalties, my siblings negotiating their own paths between family legacy and personal integrity. My connections with the Callaways grow stronger, offering glimpses of what might have been while creating new possibilities for what could be. As for Richard, we maintain minimal, cordial contact, primarily through family events involving my mother. He never apologized in so many words, but his behavior shifted subtly, less controlling, more respectful of boundaries. Whether this represents genuine growth or simply pragmatic adaptation to changed circumstances remains unclear. What is clear is that I no longer measure my worth against his approval. The little girl who craved her father's love has grown into a woman who understands that some voids can't be filled by the people who created them. Instead, I've learned to build around those spaces, creating a life rich with chosen connections and authentic love. If you're watching this and recognize your own family pain in my story, know that healing doesn't require perfect resolution or storybook reconciliation. Sometimes it simply means acknowledging the truth, releasing expectations that can never be met, and building something new from the pieces that remain. Family can be found, created, and chosen, often in unexpected places with unexpected people. Thank you for witnessing my journey. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that family wounds don't define us. It's how we heal them that shapes who we become. What's your definition of family? Drop a comment below. I read them all and would love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by those who couldn't see it, but by the courage it takes to claim it for yourself.